Hello student, today we are going to discuss the two clustering algorithm, sting and optics and their difference. First of all, sting, the statistical information grid clustering algorithm, and optics, the ordering point to identify the clustering structure. Clustering algorithms are the clustering algorithm that are used that are used for clustering that is a form of unsupervised learning. In these, the sting algorithm, that is the grid-based clustering technique, and optics, on the other hand, is a density-based clustering technique. First of all, the major difference is that the sting is the grid-based clustering technique, while the optics is a density-based clustering technique. Optics is the modification of the advanced form of the DB scan algorithm, and these two algorithms, in these two algorithms, sting is the full form. Sting is the statistical information grid, and optics is the abbreviation of the ordering point to identify clustering structure. Cluster. The second point is it is a grid-based clustering technique, and the another one, the optics, is the density-based clustering technique. And it in sting it can in sting techniques, we divide the platform into the smaller number of grid, and these grids are divided into in divided in a smallest size of grid at the bottom layer, and within on the when increasing toward the upper level, when moving toward the upward level, the same plane is divided into the larger size grids. It concern not with the data point but with the value space that surround the data point. But this is the main difference, that sting is not concerned with the data point but with the value space that surround the data points. It means that every grid that is plotted in the sting algorithm stores some crucial value, six parameters values. These values are uh, that the maximum of the data point, the minimum of the data points, the mean of the data points, and besides that, the the standard deviation and the standard deviation and the uh, average that is stored in the a grid for every grid. The the higher level cell is divided into the smaller size of the grids, and these by calculating the parametric value of the smaller circle, we can compute the uh, statistical value of the higher grid. Just adding on the value of the smaller grid parameters, we can calculate the upper layer larger size grid. In this way, it's also a hierarchical technique in which the grids there the smallest size grids lies at the bottommost layer, and with increasing towards the root when moving towards the root, the size of the grid increases, and at the root level it all combines to a single grid. uh, it has relatively less computational complexity, since it's very simple technique. Divide the plane into smaller size grid on these, and at the bottom level, these smaller size grid combine to form the larger size grid at the higher level, and finally up to the first level they combined up to a single grid. This is very simple approach. So the sting is the very simplistic approach, and its complexity is less in comparison to the optics algorithm and algorithm. But on the other hand, when we talk about the optics algorithm, it's a density-based clustering technique. It searches the data space for the area of very density data point in the data space. And while the sting was searching for the value space, it is searching for the very density data points in the data space. The high density regions are considered as the clusters, and the two clusters are divided by the low density regions. It is the extension of the density-based optical clustering of application with noise. As I told you that the optics is an advanced form of the DB scan algorithm, which is also a density-based spatial clustering technique. And the technique, it uses two parameters: the core distance and the density reachability. Uh, in the to the density reachability to find out the proper cluster. The core distance is the smallest point that make a point core or store the minimum number of points. The 2 point parameter are required for optics are epsilon and minimum points. And the min points is the minimum number of point that should lie close in that it should lie in the epsilon radius circle to declare a point as a core point. The parameter epsilon defines the radius and the neighborhood around the point P. And min point is the minimum number of neighbor that should lies in the epsilon radius circle. And it has a relatively higher complex computational complexity than the sting algorithm. In sting algorithm, so we can say that we start with a layer, bottom layer. For each cell of this layer, we calculate the confidence interval or of the probability that this cell is relevant to the query. From the internal calculation we label the cell as relevant or non-relevant. If this is the bottom layer, then end the process. We go down the hierarchy by one level and go to the step 2 that find out the in which we find out the cell is relevant or not relevant for those cells that form the relevant cell of the higher level. So basically we find out the relevant cell at the higher level, and when we find out that this cell is relevant at the higher level, then we further go to a next lower level to particularly locate that relevant field data's location. Like this, as shown in this diagram, at the bottom level or ith level, there are smaller size grid, and at the I minus 1th layer, the smaller grids, certain number of smaller grids, here four number of smaller grids combined together to form a single grid at the I minus 1th layer. So this is basically there is a grid based technique, and it maintains a hierarchy between different layers. So at the upper layer we find out that this is a relevant field, and then we go to the lower level, and if in the lower level we find out some relevant field, then we move to the next lower field and finally to the particular data value point. And while in the optic algorithm, we define a particular core distance, the minimum distance that contains the threshold value of min points. And reachability distance is the distance maximum of the distance between the core point and that point, or the core distance is called the reachability distance. So in optics algorithm, that is a density-based clustering technique. It uses two parameters, core distance and reachability distance, to find out the clustering. So that's all about these two algorithms.